You know that person who leaves family dinners early? The one who always has headphones in at restaurants? The friend who flinches when you're just eating chips? Yeah, they're not being rude, they're not dramatic, and they're definitely not trying to make you feel bad. Their brain is doing something wild that neuroscientists can literally see on brain scans. And if you're someone who feels physical rage when you hear chewing, breathing, or pen clicking, welcome. You're about to feel very seen. Here's the thing. Hating chewing sounds doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean you have anger issues, and it definitely doesn't mean you're losing your mind. But there is something fascinating happening in your brain that's completely different from the 80% of people who can tune these sounds out. Scientists call this misophonia. It means hatred of sound. But that's not quite right, because you don't hate all sounds. You hate specific sounds, the kind nobody else even notices. And when you hear them, your nervous system doesn't whisper, "That's annoying." It screams, "That's a threat." Let's start with what's actually happening in your brain. When most people hear chewing, their auditory cortex processes it as background noise and moves on. Boring, irrelevant, done. But when you hear chewing, your brain's threat detector, the amygdala, lights up like you've just spotted a predator. And here's the kicker. Neuroscientists using brain imaging found that people with misophonia have measurably larger amygdalas than people without it. Your emotional alarm system isn't just sensitive, it's structurally different. Then there's the anterior insular cortex. This is your brain's salience network, the part that decides what's important enough to pay attention to. In most brains, chewing registers as unimportant. In yours, it gets flagged as urgent, critical, threatening. Your brain treats someone eating cereal like it's a 5-alarm fire. And wild, right? Your ears work fine. Your auditory cortex processes sound normally. The misophonia isn't happening in your hearing system. It's happening in the emotional meaning-making parts of your brain. That's why this isn't a hearing problem, it's a brain wiring problem. Here's where it gets really interesting. Your brain has something called mirror neurons. They help you understand other people's actions by silently mirroring those actions in your own motor cortex. It's like your brain performs a tiny internal version of what they're doing to understand it. When someone waves, your brain internally mirrors waving. When someone smiles, your brain internally mirrors smiling. But in misophonia, this system goes haywire. Research from 2021 found that people with misophonia show abnormal connectivity between their auditory cortex, visual cortex, and the motor areas controlling facial movements like chewing. Translation? When you hear someone chew, your brain doesn't just process the sound, it excessively mirrors the chewing movement. Your motor cortex acts like you're chewing when you're not. Scientists call this action confusion. Your brain thinks you're performing an action you're not actually doing, and that mismatch creates distress. It's like your nervous system is screaming, "Something's wrong, we're out of sync, fix it now." And here's maybe the wildest part. About 45% of people with misophonia unconsciously mimic the sounds that trigger them. They'll start chewing along, or tapping along, or breathing in sync. And counterintuitively, this mimicry provides relief, because when you actually perform the action, the confusion resolves. Your brain goes, "Oh, okay, we are chewing. False alarm." Think about that. The thing you'd think would make it worse, copying the trigger, actually helps nearly half of sufferers manage the distress. So why does this happen? One theory is evolutionary. For thousands of years, being hyper-aware of others' sounds and movements helped early humans detect threats. The person who could hear subtle breathing changes or unusual chewing might notice a sick tribe member before disease spread. They might detect someone sneaking food when resources were scarce. Heightened sensitivity to others' actions could have been an advantage, but in modern life, that same trait makes you want to flee Thanksgiving dinner. What might have been a survival mechanism became a social disorder. Now, before you start self-diagnosing, because I know half of you are already thinking this is me, let's pump the brakes for a second. There's a crucial distinction here. Do you prefer quiet, or are you terrified of sound? Because some people aren't just sensitive to triggers, they're trapped in what psychologists call the anticipatory anxiety cycle. It works like this. You fear encountering a trigger, so you scan your environment constantly, hypervigilant, looking for danger. Your nervous system stays on high alert, and when the trigger inevitably happens, or you think it will, the reaction is amplified because you've already primed your body for threat. Then you avoid. You skip family meals, you isolate, you feel guilt for avoiding people you love. The guilt increases anxiety. The anxiety makes you scan harder for sounds, and the cycle spirals. One trigger becomes a full psychological trap. The fear of the sound becomes as disruptive as the sound itself. And that's where misophonia stops being a quirk and starts affecting your entire life. Let me be clear, misophonia isn't a mental health disorder in the clinical sense. It's not in the DSM-5 yet, but it's real. quality of life for people with severe misophonia is comparable to people with chronic tinnitus, that constant ringing in your ears that never stops. Up to 20% of people with misophonia report suicidal ideation. This isn't dramatic overreaction. This is genuine suffering. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people with misophonia don't act violently, even though they feel violent rage. Studies show that about 40% report no aggression at all. Another 29% report only verbal frustration. Actual physical violence is extremely rare, less than 3% of cases. But internally, the rage is real, the fantasies are vivid. You might imagine yelling, confronting, even harming the person making the sound. And then you feel profound shame. Because how can you feel that level of anger towards someone you love who's just existing? Actress Melissa Gilbert described this perfectly. She said she spent her childhood glaring at family members with eyes filled with hate, even though internally she felt terrible about it. She didn't understand why she reacted so intensely. The guilt and isolation were crushing. When she finally learned misophonia had a name, she sobbed. She wasn't a bad person. She was experiencing a neurological condition, and she's not alone. January Jones from Mad Men recently opened up about her misophonia. She described it as progressively getting worse over the years. When her brother-in-law eats chips around her, she battles an internal impulse she feels powerless to stop. Kelly Ripa has left rooms when her husband eats certain foods like peaches. Kelly Osbourne has had full meltdowns while filming with her family. These are successful, intelligent, emotionally regulated people, and they're managing something most people can't see. Here's another thing. It's not really about the sound. It's about what the sound means. Research shows that context changes everything. One study played participants the sound of nails on a chalkboard. When they were told it was from contemporary music, their discomfort dropped significantly. Same sound, different meaning, lower reaction. In misophonia, the same chewing sound from a stranger might not trigger you, but the same sound from your spouse at an intimate dinner, devastating. Not because the sound is different, but because the context, the relationship, the expectation, the emotional intimacy amplifies the perceived threat. This is why scientists are now proposing that misophonia should be understood as a social cognition disorder, not just an auditory sensitivity. Your brain isn't just processing sound, it's processing who's making the sound, why they're making it, and what it means about your relationship with them. And this is why about 70% of families with a misophonia suffer report accommodating the condition. Parents chew with their mouths closed obsessively. Spouses avoid certain foods. Siblings learn to breathe quietly. The whole family restructures around the condition. And honestly, that accommodation can help, but it can also create resentment. The person without misophonia feels like they're being punished for existing. The person with misophonia feels guilty for needing the accommodation. Nobody wins. So what actually helps? Turns out, exposure therapy, the treatment you'd use for phobias, doesn't work for misophonia. In fact, it can make things worse. Because misophonia isn't a learned fear, it's a wired-in neurological response. Repeatedly exposing yourself to triggers doesn't desensitize you, it traumatizes you. But there is something that works. Cognitive behavioral therapy adapted specifically for misophonia. A randomized controlled trial in 2020 found that 37% of people who received this specialized CBT showed clinical improvement, and the effects lasted. 1 year later, the improvements were still there. What did they do differently? Instead of exposure, they focused on task concentration, training attention away from triggers, arousal reduction, lowering the nervous system's baseline activation, positive affect labeling, cultivating positive emotions despite triggers, and stimulus manipulation, changing how you think about the context and meaning of the sound. Translation: you can't change the sound, but you can change how your brain interprets it, and that rewiring is possible. Other things that help: white noise, headphones, positioning yourself strategically in social situations so triggers are minimized, communicating your needs without shame, practicing self-compassion instead of self-judgment, recognizing that your brain isn't broken, it's just different. And here's something you might not expect. Meditation and mindfulness significantly reduce misophonia symptoms because they train your nervous system to stay calm in the presence of discomfort. They teach you that a trigger sound is just a sound. It doesn't mean danger. It doesn't require action. It's just sensory input passing through. One more thing. Women are disproportionately affected by misophonia. About 55 to 83% of diagnosed cases are women. Women report higher symptom severity, and we're not entirely sure why. It might be greater interoceptive awareness. Women tend to feel their internal body signals more intensely. It might be anxiety sensitivity. It might be biological sex differences in threat detection and emotion regulation. But what we do know is this. If you're a woman struggling with misophonia, you're part of a large, under-recognized group. You're not uniquely sensitive or overly emotional. Your brain is wired in a way that science is only beginning to understand. So what does this all mean? If you can't stand chewing sounds, you're not broken. You're not a bad person. You're not destined for isolation. Your brain's threat detection system, your mirror neuron network, your emotional regulation circuits, they're all calibrated differently. And that difference is measurable, real, and valid. The next time someone dismisses you as dramatic or tells you to just ignore it, remember this. Neuroscientists can see your misophonia on brain scans. Psychologists have proven treatments that work, and about 1 in 5 people experience some level of this. You're not alone, you're not making it up, and you're definitely not the problem. You're just playing a different game, one where the rules are written in brain chemistry, not social etiquette. And honestly, understanding that changes everything. So tell me, do you have misophonia or know someone who does? What triggers you most? Drop your experience in the comments. And if this video just explained something you've never been able to put into words, hit subscribe. The next video breaks down why some people are morning people and others would literally fight the sun. I'll see you there.